Kristen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
You're my very first repeat guest, and I am so excited.
And I am so honored.
So, for those who haven't listened to the previous interview, I like to start every interview by asking guests what you wanted to be as a kid. So, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to live in a caravan and travel around with a pride of lions like the wild thornberries.
I remember
So
this.
very different. Yes, very different what I do now, although I do have a house tiger and my book is dedicated to her because she is the love of my life. So
Not an
less
actual
adventure. Well,
tiger, because some people actually do have tigers.
that's true. I am not Joe Exotic, and California would definitely come after me for that. So can't have my own house tiger. But she thinks she's a tiger, but no, she's just a little striped ginger cat with three brain cells. So
Randomly, a couple years ago, someone on my Instagram posted that they saw a tiger in their neighborhood because in Houston, Texas, someone was
oh
keeping a tiger in their home and it got let loose. And
nope.
so it got
No.
captured on cameras.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'm not a big supporter of HOAs, but I feel like if they can have a law that your neighbor can't have a tiger, like I kind of support that law
That's kind of a
because
good
that's
rule.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally.
So I am so excited to have you back. How do you think that wanting to have ride in a caravan connects to what you do today and most recently your book?
Yeah, my book is a comedic travel memoir, so it's definitely like the adventure component is there. It's
Mm.
me traveling all over the world. I lived in Luxembourg on a Fulbright scholarship for a year, and I lived in China working for the largest wine importer for 3.5 years. So adventure is definitely something that's part of my personality. And the book, I won't give away the end, but it talks about finding my cat and the finding belonging and settling down. And so I feel like it's not wild animals, but it's definitely about the love we get from animals and how they are like part of belonging. And after you travel the world, sometimes you want to just snuggle up with your cat after like a decade of doing that.
Hmm. Well, tell me, how did you decide to write this book? Was it that I assume that the experience of traveling and living in so many different countries changed you. And I think we touched on this in that first interview, but how did the idea for the book come about? Tell me all the things.
Yeah, so let's see. I had a friend write a travel memoir maybe like 7 years ago when
Hmm.
she moved back from Shanghai to America. And so that was the first, like, oh, I know someone who has written a book. That's so cool. And she's so amazing. How do I do that? I'm so inspired. That was kind of like the first nugget of an idea. And then when I moved to LA, when we met, I was doing coaching, I was doing acting, writing, directing, a YouTube channel. I was doing all the things. And then COVID hit. And so I was like, wow, I can't be on stage anymore. I had been on stage a couple nights a week, and
Hmm.
now that was completely impossible. So I had to kind of rethink, well, I love creating and I love comedy. What is the thing that I can do based in this circumstance? And I actually got some great advice. I was in the Women in Film mentorship program,
Hmm.
and my mentor was Joanna Johnson, who is the showrunner and creator of The Fosters and Good Trouble, the TV show on Freeform. So she was like, you can do all of the things, but become really good at one thing,
Hmm.
and then they'll let you do the other things. So I had been doing kind of like whack-a-mole, exhausted, like building my writing skills, building my acting skills, building my directing skills, building my improv and comedy skills. And she was like, don't do that. Become really good at the one thing and then branch out from there. For context, she was an actress on Bold and Beautiful,
Hmm.
the soap show, and then she wanted to do more. So then she went into writing. So I was like, oh, cool. Okay, become really good at the one thing. And the only thing I can do right now is write. So I was like, okay, I'll focus on writing. And so I wrote the proposal for the memoir. I got an agent for the memoir. Then the agent sold it to an editor who's bought two of my books now, that one and another one that's coming out. That's related to, it's called Get Paid to Do What You Love, and is really about kind of like paid vacation and career changes. So that
Hmm.
one is very similar to what you're doing. But the first book is really about going through all of those
Mm,
transitions because I've lived an adventurous life and I move every 3 years. I'm constantly changing careers.
mm,
My whole life is just a chain of switching careers every 3 years minimum or like maximum. I've learned so much from this, but the book isn't just about the places I visited. It's about learning how to transition and how, in the end, that made me so much of a happier person.
mm.
But you have to be able to take those risks, and they're terrifying, and it sucks a little bit after you take the leap, but it does end up you having a life that really makes you happier and more fulfilled in what is interesting to you.
Mm. That's the total opposite of me. I've lived in I've lived in Dallas or the Dallas area, surrounding areas, my whole life. Went to school there. Went to school in Arlington, which is 25 minutes away from Dallas, then lived in the suburbs, 20 minutes north. Now I'm back in Dallas. So, for those who are wanting a sense of adventure, but maybe they can't move because kids, work, right? So, it's like, okay, how do I create a sense of adventure in what I'm doing right now? Like,
Yeah, so I feel like for that, it's very much like if you don't feel fully fulfilled in your work, which like you probably don't because work isn't life, right? Life is where you feel fulfilled, and work is a component of life. But at the same time, work is what you spend 5 out of 7 days doing. So it needs to be something that makes you happy. And I think that if you want adventure outside of work, it's thinking about like, what are the other goals that I have? And how do I make sure that I'm putting that on my calendar?
hmm,
Because a lot of people, like as a writer, for example, a lot of people are like, I want to write a novel, I want to write a memoir, I want to write whatever. And the advice I have is extremely boring. It's just you have to write every day. It's really about getting slowly better at something. And if there's something that sparks joy in you and that feels adventurous for you, it's
hmm,
about making sure that you actually commit to it and
hmm,
spend time regularly doing it, which is easier said than done. I'm not saying that's hard. Writing 2 hours a day, I have to carve out that time. This morning I didn't do it. So now I'm like, okay, in the evening I need to do it. So it's really making that commitment. And that's how change and how happiness happens is
hmm.
committing to it and seeing like, this is genuinely something I know I want. Well, then how do you make it happen? I think that's the really hard part is like seeing something and idealizing or thinking about it is one thing. Actually acting and putting it into your schedule is another thing. That is really hard because life gets in the way.
Mm. And also like a really brave thing to do.
Yeah, totally. I think we have these ideas and we watch movie and TV and we're like, oh, this person does this cool thing. Like, I wish I could do more of whatever that thing is that they do. But it means like, hey, I'm not going to spend time with my family X hours a week, or I'm not going to look at my emails after work. I'm going to focus on this. And so it is like creating a change in behavior and
Mhm,
creating boundaries. And both of those are very difficult to do. Like it
mhm,
is brave to create boundaries with people.
mm. Yes. And then brave to do something new that we're probably going to
Yeah.
suck at.
Yes. Yes. I'm like scared to read old things I wrote because I'm like, oh, but it is like a learning experience.
Yeah.
And I'm reading the audiobook. So if someone purchases the audiobook, it's my voice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love recording it. But certain parts I was like, oh wow, I used the same word 3 times in that paragraph. Is that good writing? No. But it's my debut. And as long as not every single paragraph has the same word 3 times, you know what? It's not going to be perfect. And
Yep.
hey, I got a book. I finished a book. So
Yes.
there's going to be things that aren't exactly what you want. And even if you're published as an author, there's still room to grow. There's steps along the way, and you have to like give yourself grace at some point.
Yeah. And to go for it even when it's not perfect. Like
Yeah.
you're publishing it, even though you found three of the same words in one paragraph.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, if someone critiques that this isn't the best writing in the world, they might have a point, but like, hey, that's part of taking the steps to get there. And I'm just glad I finished it. And I know that other parts of it are strong. There, it's
Yeah.
not perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read somewhere on social media somewhere that we all want to start out at our 100th, thinking about like a podcast. We want to start out as good as we will be in our 100th episode, but we have to
Yes.
go through 1 through 99 to get there.
Yes.
And we're going to suck and we're going to look back on it and it's not going to. be any
Yeah,
good.
there's a quote, I think it's Ira Glass, and I don't remember the specific wording, but basically, you have good taste, which
Yes.
means you are not gonna be impressed by the first couple things you put out there because
Hmm.
you know you don't feel it's good because you have good taste. But that doesn't mean you don't do it. You just keep working on it, and you will get to the point where you're like, oh, this is actually something that's good. I feel like a lot of people they'll start and then it's like, oh, I don't like this. And then like the saboteur, which we learned about in coach, like comes in and is like, oh, this is bad. You did this wrong, blah, 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 blah. And that snubs out creativity and like snubs out the like bravery and being happy and making that change and adding adventure to your life.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually went to go see Ira Glass and he talked about that years ago and
Oh,
it stuck
so
with me. It
jealous.
stuck with
Yes.
me. Like, oh, you have good taste. You can see it, but maybe you can't get there on creating it just yet. It takes practice. It
Yeah.
takes showing up, and sometimes it's going to be good, and sometimes it's not going to be that good. But you have to keep
Yes.
creating.
Yeah, totally. I'm so jealous you got to see that.
It was years ago, but it stuck with me. That good taste thing stuck with
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you learn about yourself, Kristen, through this process, through writing this book, reflecting on these adventures?
It's a really weird experience writing a memoir because you are sitting in other chapters of your life
Mm,
and reliving them, both on an emotional level of like really putting yourself back in that moment. And so you are revisiting a lot of my chapters are fun, some are more serious. You're revisiting like the most joyful and the hardest parts of your life,
mm,
and also revisiting how you thought back then.
mm,
So I feel like I have some chapters in my early 20s. The book basically spans all through my 20s. Like, for example, relationships and guys being just completely devastated by men who just treated me horribly.
mm.
Going back and revisiting that, and now I'm in a healthy relationship and I'm happy. And revisiting that, I'm like, wow, I feel so dumb. But it's not. It's just like it's another part of your life which is hard and took 10 years. And it shows the work that I've done to grow as a person. It's really interesting revisiting and being like, wow, like look at how I thought back then.
Mm,
And look at how that kind of limited me and hurt me. When you put in the work, you kind of take that away and you don't have to
mm,
worry about that, or you learn how to like protect yourself and love yourself. And that is really hard. That is a skill that you learn.
mm,
Going back and revisiting and like sitting in other periods of your life is not always fun. Sometimes it's
mm.
fun. The fun chapters, I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, oh my gosh, this was so much fun. And I'm in a good mood. And then the other the darker chapters, I'm like kind of sad in my current life because I'm just like, oh, I hate this. I'm like, I want to write less sad chapters because
No.
they're not fun as a writer either.
Well, and then I bet those sad ones are the ones that also really connect with people.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Well, Elizabeth Gilbert was saying for her books, someone came up and was like, hey, the author of Eat, Pray, Love was like,
Mhm.
hey, my husband was abusive too. And for her, she was like, my husband didn't abuse me, but it made her realize that everyone connects with your work differently because
Mm,
they have their own experiences. But I think the key to having someone connect, even if it's slightly a different experience than yours, which they all will be, is that you have to be vulnerable
mm,
in order. And I read Wild by Cheryl Strayed. It's another memoir. And I was reading that while writing this one. And she's just so brave. She talks about doing heroin and cheating on
mm,
her partners and grief. And listening to that, I was like, wow, that is so brave to share that with the world. So while I was writing my book, I tried to push myself. So yeah, that was a kind of interesting experience.
Well, and it's interesting, something that's been coming up. Kristen and I met at coach training in Los Angeles. So the first coach training I did was Coactive Training Institute, CTI. And I traveled to different cities for it. And one of the cities that I loved, probably my favorite, was LA. The people that I got to meet there. Kristen was one
Yeah.
of them. It was just a fun weekend. So coaching now, and I partner with the coaching firm out of Boston. They partner with companies and they bring leaders in. Each leader is presented with three coaches, and then they pick who they kind of connected with more. I found that at first I was trying to put up kind of like, oh, I have it all together. I know everything. And then once I started like being authentically me, still, of course, I have the experience and all that stuff, but also sharing who I am. So, first in my family to go to college, like share my story. When I started showing up more authentically, people started picking me more. It's interesting. Like,
Mm.
oh, and then I found that in coaching conversations, like when people start being more authentically themselves and confident about that, magic happens. It's
Yeah,
because
I
you're,
feel like,
yeah,
oh, I was just gonna say, like, there's this like old school view in business that like, oh, if you're a professional, you should put up this, oh, well, I'm an expert and like,
yes, I
you
know
know,
everything.
I know everything. I'm very serious. And I feel like growing up, I was very taught that as well, which I
Mm,
talk about in the book of like, no elbows on the table. My family was not well off, but I lived in an extremely wealthy community.
mm,
So I was very much aware of how I stuck out. There was very much this thing we were taught, oh, you have to act like who you want to be and those people, and then you'll be accepted. But
mm,
I think that that's creating a barrier that like people feel. And I've met people who are like very buttoned up and professional and they just don't feel real.
mm,
And then it's like so hard to have a conversation with them because it feels like you're talking to like a press spot. Like it's not a
yes.
real person who's having
Yeah.
genuine interactions.
Yeah. So, like when people are reading your book and they can sense that you're being authentic, that you're sharing a
Yeah.
vulnerable piece. Even when I'm doing these coaching conversations, I share first my family or I was in work I didn't enjoy. I can see their own kind of mask that they were holding up starts fading away. Like, oh, I can relax.
Yeah.
This can be a real
Yeah.
conversation, which I imagine is what
Yeah.
happens when we're reading too.
Yes, totally. I think that in order for other, and I've had the book hasn't come out yet as of recording this, so not a lot of people have read it yet, but a couple people have already written reviews or messaged me privately, like critics, talking
Hmm.
about how they related to it. And that feels really good. And some of them are dealing with things that aren't relevant to, like, one was talking to, I talk about my parents' divorce, and she spoke to me about like parenting. And
Hmm.
I'm not a parent, so
Hmm.
I can't relate to that. But I was like, oh, I'm so grateful that sharing my experience as a child helps someone reflect on who they are as a parent. So I feel like those components really are essential to human connection. And when we hide that, we take away from really
Hmm.
building real relationships.
Yeah. And real connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read something earlier today. Rupi Kapoor, she's like a poet, that we're here for community, that we're here for connection. That's why we're really
Yeah.
here.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Mhm. So I love that you share that. And so, how do you think connection helped you throughout your traveling and through this book journey?
Oh my gosh. Well, talking about like people hating their careers and stuff like that, through living all over the world, I've seen people doing the craziest things, like a French guy who he works in a winery in rural China. He doesn't speak English, he doesn't speak Chinese. He speaks French with a thick Bordeaux accent so that I couldn't even like I speak Parisian accent French. I could not understand him. And he has an amazing life. And so I think through travel, I saw all these people where I'm like, how did you get here? Geographically, but also just like in your life. And that's really inspiring is when you talk to those people, like when you listen to podcasts and when you talk to people who are doing things that you were like, I didn't even think that was possible or
Hmm.
like on my radar. I feel like that is really inspiring. And I think something I learned through doing these things is every time I would move, like when I moved to China, my roommates were like, so you don't speak Chinese? I'm like, no Chinese. They're like, you don't have a job? No job. You don't have a place to live? No place to live. And they're like, yeah, that's insane. You're a crazy person.
Hmm.
How's that going to work out? But then I reflect on their lives and like they've never lived outside of the US and they've never traveled outside the US. So like they are projecting their own fears.
Right.
So it's not coming from a place of hate or a place of trying to
No.
discourage me. It's coming from a place of love, but a place of fear. And so through that, I realized, okay, if you want to make a big change, you need to find people who have already done something similar and
Hmm.
get advice from them. Never take advice from like your family that hasn't done it or like friends who haven't done it. They're trying to be supportive, but they don't know how to, and they're trying to protect you.
Hmm.
So you need to find people who have actually done it so that you can go to them and they can actually give you like a little bit of a roadmap and encourage you with suggestions to help you along the way.
Yeah, and then that's part of like one being brave, looking for that connection. Because usually what happens if we don't have, maybe it's not our closest friends that have done that. So it's looking for new friends that might be in a different situation. And that takes courage again.
I'm all for like sliding in someone's DMs. Like if you know someone, you follow them online and they do something you want to do, being like, "Hey, I really want to do this as well. Could I send you a Starbucks gift card and we quickly do like for coffee and could we do like a Zoom or could we meet up?" I've done that more times than I want to admit. And like people, if as long as you're genuine and it's like truly, you're not going and being like, "I want to take your time and I
Mm,
deserve your time." As long as you're
mm,
coming from a place of like admiration and like I would be grateful, that I feel like is a great way to even have a stranger be like, "Oh my God, absolutely. Let's
mm.
chat about it."
So tell us, what do you want the audience, the people reading your book, to take away? What's the big theme that you want them to take away from reading?
I really want them to take away that you can do whatever you want in your life and you just have to like have the bravery to do it. I really think one person said the book's about growing up, and I think it's really about like when we're younger, like I said, people try and protect us. We're told like, "Oh, you can only do this. You have to have a full-time job. You can't sell
Mm,
things online. You can't do your own business. You can't be a freelancer. How are you going to get insurance? Blah, 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 blah." Whatever it is,
mm,
we're told that there's only like one way. You have to buy a house. That's the only way to invest is to buy a house. We're told all of these specific things that aren't true. And I think the real richness of life is taking your own path and figuring out what is right for you. And when we went through coaching, we talk about values like, what
mm,
are your personal values? Mine are authenticity, creativity, freedom, and respect. And
mm.
so for me, like as an author, I have freedom. I can plan my schedule. I have a copywriting business as well. I choose what clients I work with. I choose when I have meetings. What are the things that you can do to make the life that fits your specific values,
Mm.
and not being afraid to do those, I think is really an important message in the book.
Kristen, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find your book?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's called Where to Nest, a global search for love, cheap wine, and a place to belong. And it's on there. So check out Amazon or ask your local indie bookstore. And then also follow me online. That's my first book, which is really about like having an alternative life. And then I have another book that's more of a how-to on how to get there and start your own. It's called Get Paid to Do What You Love. So it's very much about creating that unique life. So if you follow me online, I will definitely keep you posted on upcoming projects. And yeah.
And where can people find you online?
Oh, yes. I'm at Kristen Van Nest, my name. And you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all of the above.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.